47 American paratroopers walked into the long, high mountains. 19 walked out. The rest vanished, swallowed by limestone caves, underground rivers, and tunnel networks so deep that search parties never recovered a single body. No firefights, no artillery signatures, no booby trap fragments. Just silence. Then absence. Their names were added to the MIA rolls, their fate listed simply as enemy action in complex terrain. That was March 1967. The 173rd Airborne Brigade's sweep through the eastern approaches of the Long High Range ended in one of the most humiliating classified losses of the early war. MACV Command drew a red line around the 14-square-kilometer limestone massif southeast of Nui Dat and stamped 3 words across the map: off limits, U.S. ground forces only. The problem did not disappear with the red ink. The Viet Cong's D445 Provincial Mobile Battalion continued to operate from deep cave systems inside the range, launching mortars against Australian positions, ambushing convoys on Route 15, and vanishing before reaction forces could arrive. B-52 arc light strikes dropped more than 40,000 tons of ordnance between 1966 and 1968. 3 major Marine Battalion operations probed the northern and western slopes. Nothing changed. The enemy remained. Someone had to solve the Long High problem. The task was first given to the Australian SAS regiment. 3 squadrons rotated through Phuoc Tuy province, never more than 150 men in country. Small, long-range reconnaissance patrols had already proven brutally effective in rubber plantations and coastal scrub. Command reasoned the same quiet, patient methods would work in the limestone spine 23 kilometers southeast of Nui Dat. They were wrong. From mid-1967 through most of 1968, the Australian SAS mounted repeated deep penetration patrols into the Long High. They gathered useful intelligence, supply routes, sentry rotations, cache locations, but the battalion-level headquarters complex remained untouched. Ambushes produced kills, yet D445 simply adapted. Tighter security, restricted night movement, increased use of alternate trails. Viet Cong morale did not crack. The caves stayed secure. The ghosts did not appear. By late summer 1968, Australian liaison reports to Task Force headquarters were terse. Sustained operations inside the range were yielding diminishing returns. Patrols were being detected earlier. Counter-tracking teams were appearing on old SAS routes. Several 5-man teams returned with contacts that felt pre-planned rather than opportunistic. One patrol lost 2 men to a silent night snatch. Bodies never found. No spent brass. No blood trail. The phrase that began circulating in closed Australian briefings was blunt: "We're hunting shadows in their house." In September 1968, MACV reviewed the classified after-action summaries. The conclusion was inescapable. The Long High Mountains had defeated conventional American sweeps, heavy bombardment, and even the elite Australian SAS. A different approach was required, one that could live inside the enemy's ecosystem for weeks without being expelled. The mission was quietly reassigned, not to another Marine battalion, not to another Australian squadron, to a U.S. Army Special Forces detachment already operating in Phuoc Tuy, the Green Berets. They would not attempt to seize the mountains. They would become the mountains. To understand why MACV turned to the Green Berets after the Australian SAS patrols failed to break the Long High deadlock, one must first grasp the fundamental difference in operational culture that existed even within the American military in Vietnam. Regular U.S. Army and Marine units measured progress in hectares cleared, enemy body counts, and fire missions expended. The doctrine was inherited from World War II and Korea. Locate, fix, destroy with superior firepower. In the triple canopy limestone karst of the Long Hai, that doctrine met its limit. You cannot fix what you cannot find. You cannot destroy what retreats 20 meters underground the moment the first helicopter is heard. The 5th Special Forces Group, airborne, elements of which had been operating in Phuoc Tuy Province since 1966, worked from a different premise. Their mandate in the province was not to seize terrain or rack up confirmed kills. It was to deny the Viet Cong freedom of movement and sanctuary by any means that worked. Small teams, deep immersion, patience measured in weeks, not hours. Where line infantry swept, special forces infiltrated and waited. By late 1968, a reinforced A detachment, A-Team, under Captain Elias Eli Harlan, had become the de facto owners of the Long Hai problem. Harlan, a 32-year-old Kentuckian with 2 prior tours already behind him, had spent most of his career training Montagnard irregulars in the Central Highlands. He spoke rudimentary Bru and Jarai, understood the psychology of hill tribe fighters, and, most critically, knew how to turn indigenous tracking skills into a weapon system. Harlan's most valuable asset was not American. It was Sergeant Kasor Dat, a 34-year-old Jarai tribesman from the Darlak Plateau, who had been with the detachment since 1967. Recruited through the CIDG program, Dat possessed sensory acuity that baffled even the most experienced Green Beret recon men. He could distinguish the faint metallic scent of gun oil on a man's hands from 50 meters downwind. He could read the age of a disturbed leaf to within hours by the precise way chlorophyll broke down. He could follow a trail across bare limestone where infrared scanners saw only rock. American technicians called it primitive. Harlan called it precision. In October 1968, after the last Australian patrol withdrew with nothing more than incremental mapping data, MAC-V attached a liaison officer to Harlan's team, Captain Robert Bob Kessler, a 1st Cavalry Division intelligence captain detailed to MAC-V SOG, but reassigned for this evaluation. Kessler arrived at the Nui Dat Forward Operating Base, expecting to observe another round of failed small unit raids. He left 17 days later with a transfer request already drafted. The doctrinal inversion was immediate and total. Where Australian SAS patrols, effective elsewhere, had still relied on relatively conventional ambush templates, L-shaped killing zones, claymores, brief violent contact followed by rapid exfiltration, Harlan's teams discarded the template entirely. Patrols were 5 men, 3 Americans, 1 or 2 indigenous trackers, usually Dat or one of his cousins, and occasionally a Montagnard rifleman for security. Insertion was always by foot, never helicopter, often starting 10 to 15 kilometers from the target area to avoid telltale rotor noise. Movement was glacial, 100 to 300 meters per hour in daylight, less at night. No radio checks unless life or death. Communication within the patrol used finger touches on shoulders, elbows, wrists, signals so subtle that Kessler initially missed half of them. The philosophy was not reconnaissance leading to strike, it was predation. The jungle was not an obstacle to overcome, it was the medium through which the hunter moved. The enemy was not an army to be engaged. He was game to be studied, stalked, and culled at moments of maximum psychological impact. Kessler's first field notes, later appended to his classified debrief, captured the shift. These men do not patrol, they hunt. They do not seek contact, They wait until contact is inevitable and on their terms. Where we would fire a squad to suppress, they remain motionless for 18 hours watching a single trail intersection. When the target appears, death arrives in less than 4 seconds, often without a shot audible beyond 30 meters. Then they vanish. No pursuit, no trophies beyond what they leave deliberately for the next enemy patrol to find. The first joint operation Kessler witnessed would crystallize why the long high had been given to these men. On October 14, 1968, Captain Kessler accompanied Harlan's 5-man team on what was logged simply as Long High Reconnaissance Patrol Number 4. The patrol departed the Nui Dat forward base at 0300 hours on foot, moving through 8 kilometers of rubber plantation before crossing into the dense secondary jungle that marked the eastern fringe of the range. No insertion by helicopter, no artillery prep, no air cover on station. Kessler noted the silence first. No verbal commands, no whispered radio checks. Movement was communicated by light touches, 2 fingers on the shoulder for freeze, flat palm on the back for slow, thumb pressed into the forearm for danger close. The signals were so understated that Kessler, walking third in file, frequently lost visual contact with the man ahead for seconds at a time, even though the spacing was never more than 5 meters. By 0630, the patrol had covered 12 kilometers and established an observation position overlooking a narrow limestone trail that intelligence from earlier Australian reports identified as a regular courier route used by D445 battalion runners moving between cave entrances. The team did not dig in. They did not establish fields of fire or place claymores. Instead, 4 men simply dissolved into the undergrowth, 2 on each side of the trail, while Sergeant Dack moved forward alone to read the ground. For 27 minutes, Dack worked the trail itself. He crouched, face inches from the dirt, nostrils flaring. He crushed leaves between thumb and forefinger, tasted moisture on broken stems, traced faint scuff marks with calloused fingertips. When he returned, he placed a single finger against Harlan's wrist and made a small circular motion. 3 men, recent, heading west, expected return within the hour. The team waited. At 11:37, 3 Viet Cong couriers appeared exactly on schedule, moving in loose single file, carbine slung, 1 man carrying a small rucksack. They never saw the killing zone. The lead courier stepped on a pressure release fuse connected to a command-detonated directional charge, a modified Chinese stick grenade bundle. The blast was tightly focused, 4 seconds of violence, 3 bodies down, no secondary explosion audible beyond 40 meters. Harlan's M16 remained on safe. The other 3 weapons stayed silent. Clean kill. 0 friendly casualties. Standard American procedure would have called for immediate break contact and exfiltration. Harlan's team remained in place. For the next 7 hours, they watched the same trail from concealed positions. At 1820, a 7-man Viet Cong search party arrived, sent when the couriers failed to report in. The search team found the 3 bodies arranged upright against the base of 2 large banyan trees, backs to the trunks, legs extended, eyes open, hands resting on their thighs, as if seated at rest after a long march. Each man's AK-47 lay across his lap. Tucked neatly into the collar of each fatigue shirt was a single Ace of Spades playing card, black, unmistakable, the death card already circulating in Vietnamese superstition as an omen of violent end. From 50 meters, Kessler watched the reaction through binoculars. The search team froze for almost 30 seconds. Then panic rippled through them, shoulders hunching, weapons swinging wildly at empty jungle, voices rising in sharp, frightened bursts. 1 man dropped to his knees and vomited. Another fired a full magazine into the canopy, 30 rounds spraying blindly at nothing. The rest clustered together, rather than dispersing to search, gestures frantic and uncoordinated. They collected the bodies hastily, dragging them down the trail at a near run, abandoning any pretense of tactical movement. Harlan's team did not pursue. They did not engage. They simply observed until the search party disappeared around a bend, then melted back into the karst without leaving a footprint that Dak had not deliberately placed. In his classified after-action notes, later forwarded to MACV-SOG headquarters, Kessler wrote, "Australian SAS ambushes kill efficiently. These men do something else. They weaponize the dead." The bodies were not mutilated, no ears taken, no throats cut for trophies. They were staged, positioned to tell a story the living cannot ignore. We were here. We saw you. We chose when you died. We chose how you will be remembered. The effect on the follow-on element was immediate psychological degradation. Unit cohesion visibly fractured in under 60 seconds. Recommend no further joint operations with this detachment. Request reassignment. Kessler's transfer was approved 3 days later. The patrol had lasted 19 days total. Confirmed kills, 3. Rounds fired by the team, 0. Psychological casualties inflicted on the enemy, at least 7, probably more as word spread through D445's ranks. The Long High operation was only beginning. The Long High operation, officially designated Project Phantom Ridge in classified MACV annexes, began in earnest in late October 1968 and ran continuously through the spring of 1969. Its objective was never to destroy the D445 Provincial Mobile Battalion in a conventional sense. The cave complex was too deep, too ventilated, too heavily defended by interlocking anti-aircraft positions and internal security perimeters. Instead, the Green Beret teams were tasked with mapping every functional entrance, every supply tunnel, every habitual personnel movement, and then turning that knowledge into a slow, deliberate erosion of the enemy's will to operate. 17 long-range reconnaissance patrols were inserted over 4 months. Each consisted of 5 men, usually Harlan or his executive officer, 2 other experienced Green Berets, Sergeant Dat, or one of the 3 Jirai trackers he had personally trained, and occasionally a CIDG striker for additional security. Insertion distances ranged from 12 to 18 kilometers on foot. Dwell times inside the range averaged 14 to 21 days. Resupply was by cached food and water pre-positioned during earlier patrols. No helicopter drops, no aerial resupply signatures. The teams did not seek decisive engagements. They mapped, they observed, they culled selectively. Dat's contribution proved decisive. He identified 19 separate game trails, well-worn footpaths through the karst that Viet Cong personnel used habitually to move between cave entrances, water points, and cache sites. These were not random routes. They represented decades of accumulated tactical preference, paths of least resistance, minimal exposure, optimal cover. Dat treated them exactly as animal runs in the Central Highlands. The principle was the same. You do not close every trail. You select 3 or 4 of the highest value ones and turn them into intermittent killing zones. Strikes were unpredictable in timing and method. One patrol might wait 72 hours motionless beside a trail and take a single 2-man courier team with suppressed weapons. Another might place a single pressure-detonated charge and vanish for 10 days before returning to the same location. A third might do nothing for 2 weeks, except leave subtle, unnerving signs. A single fresh footprint appearing in the middle of a limestone slab with no approach trail. Equipment quietly rearranged inside an unguarded sentry post, while the guards slept 10 meters away. A small carved symbol, a stylized mountain cat, etched into tree bark at eye level on frequently used paths. The cumulative effect was not measured in body count. though the detachment's internal tally showed a sustained kill ratio approaching 14-1 over the period. The real metric was behavioral change. Captured D-445 battalion documents and post-war interrogation summaries from defectors paint a clear picture of progressive collapse. 4. November 1968. 3 comrades did not return from water detail near entrance 7. Search party found no sign of struggle, no blood, no expended cartridges. Political cadre suggest possible defection. Commander believes otherwise. November 9th, 1968. Sentry at Post 3 reported hearing movement at 0230. Illumination round showed nothing. At dawn, sentry found with throat cut from behind. Adjacent posts, 15 meters, heard no sound. November 15th, 1968. Night patrols suspended in eastern sector. All movement restricted to daylight hours with minimum 2-man teams. Requests for reinforcement from 274th Regiment denied. Area still considered secure from American large unit operations. December 3rd, 1968. Morale deteriorating. Soldiers refuse solo tasks after dark. Several report dreams of being watched by invisible eyes. Cadre conducting political re-education sessions twice daily. 22nd January, 1969. Headquarters complex effectively isolated. Supply runs to southern caches reduced by 60%. Men disappear from sentry rotations without trace. Unit strength intact on paper, combat effectiveness negligible. By February 1969, D-445 had ceased meaningful offensive operations from the Long High. They retained their weapons, their ammunition stockpiles, their field hospital. Yet they no longer projected power beyond the immediate cave mouths. Patrols were minimal. Couriers moved only in large, heavily armed groups, and even then, at greatly reduced frequency. Political officers struggled to maintain the narrative of inevitable victory when men vanished from positions that had been secure for years. The Green Berets achieved this without a single battalion-sized sweep, without napalm runs, without B-52 strikes. They did it by living inside the enemy's ecosystem longer than the enemy could tolerate an unseen predator. The philosophy that made it possible was not taught in any Fort Bragg manual of the era. It was distilled from years of working with indigenous fighters in environments where firepower was irrelevant and survival depended on fieldcraft, patience, and psychological leverage. Harlan's men did not fight the jungle. They merged with it. They moved the way DAT's ancestors had tracked game across the plateaus. Silent, observant, lethal only when the moment was perfect. Where American conventional forces had seen the Long High as terrain to be conquered, and even the Australian SAS had treated it as a reconnaissance objective, Harlan's detachment treated it as a hunting ground. And in a hunting ground, the prey does not win by being stronger. It wins, if it wins at all, by never being seen. The Viet Cong did not win. The psychological warfare conducted by Harlan's detachment had no formal name in declassified documentation. It existed only in the operational annexes of after-action reports, in the debriefs of the few liaison officers who survived long enough to write them, and in the folklore that spread through D-445 battalion ranks. The method was straightforward in principle, devastating in execution. Every contact was an opportunity, not to report to higher headquarters, but to speak directly to the enemy. The message was crafted to exploit the deepest cultural fears of rural Vietnamese fighters: forest spirits, vengeful ghosts, omens of inescapable death. Bodies were never simply left where they fell. They were arranged with deliberate theatricality. A single courier might be found seated upright against a tree, eyes wide open, hands folded in his lap, an ace of spades card placed precisely between his lips, as if he had been made to swallow his own fate. A 2-man water detail might be discovered back to back, weapons crossed over their chests like an honor guard, each man's throat marked with a single clean incision. No arterial spray, no struggle signs, suggesting they had been taken simultaneously and without warning. In several documented cases, operators infiltrated sentry perimeters at night and left no bodies at all, only rearranged equipment, a single fresh footprint in the center of a guarded path that began and ended nowhere, or a small carved feline track symbol appearing on tree trunks at regular intervals along habitual routes. These were not random acts of terror. They were calibrated communications. The ace of spades, already in limited circulation among American units, was used deliberately because Vietnamese peasant soldiers associated the black spade with certain death omens from old gambling and spirit tales. The staged positions exploited animist beliefs. A body left at rest implied the killer had complete mastery over life and death, allowing the victim a mock dignity before taking it away forever. The absence of noise, blood trails, or brass turned every disappearance into a supernatural event rather than a military one. The impact was measurable. Interrogation reports of captured or defected D445 personnel from early 1969 repeatedly cited the same phenomena. Soldiers refusing night duty, demanding protective amulets from village monks before entering certain sectors, conducting pre-patrol spirit offerings, and, most critically, refusing to execute orders that required movement through haunted trails. Political cadre lectures on materialist inevitability lost traction when men vanished without trace from positions that had been impregnable for years. Desertion rates spiked. Combat effectiveness plummeted, even as paper strength remained stable. The transformation that enabled these methods began long before Vietnam. Green Beret selection in the late 1960s already screened for traits rare in conventional forces: exceptional pattern recognition, high pain tolerance, low need for external validation, and what internal psychological evaluations termed predatory patience, the capacity to remain motionless and hyper-aware for days while waiting for the precise moment to act. Only 1 in 10 candidates completed the full Q-course pipeline. Those who did then underwent months of additional specialized training, not in conventional jungle schools, but alongside indigenous trackers in environments where survival depended on reading the land as intimately as reading an enemy. A visible marker of this shift was the cut boot practice. Operators removed the soles from standard jungle boots and replaced them with thin strips of scavenged tire rubber cut to mimic the tread pattern of Vietnamese Ho Chi Minh sandals. From a tracking perspective, they ceased to exist as Americans. They became something the enemy could not categorize. Not large, noisy units, not even the stealthy Australians, but phantoms wearing the enemy's own footprint. The cost was steep. Men who learned to think and move as predators did not easily revert to civilian life. Post-tour psychological adjustment issues among detachment veterans ran higher than service-wide averages, despite far lower casualty rates. Many carried the same quiet detachment and hypervigilance home. Families and communities struggled to recognize the men who returned. In 1974, 3 years after the last U.S. combat units departed Vietnam, a final classified assessment was prepared by the Special Operations Division, JCS, distributed to fewer than 40 recipients, and stamped top secret /no foreign. It reached conclusions that directly contradicted prevailing MACV doctrine. Small, highly autonomous teams, operating with near total freedom of method, achieve strategic effects disproportionate to their size. Indigenous tracking skills, properly integrated, provided persistent ISR capabilities that no sensor array could replicate. Deliberate psychological operations targeting enemy belief systems could neutralize a formed unit more effectively than attrition or bombardment. Certain techniques employed, particularly regarding the treatment and staging of enemy dead, would have violated standing MAC v. ROE and Geneva Convention interpretations if conducted by conventional U.S. forces. The report was buried. Public acknowledgement would have invited political and moral scrutiny the Pentagon preferred to avoid. Better that the Longhai success remain an obscure footnote, credited vaguely to Special Forces operations in Phuc Tuy Province. Yet fragments leaked over decades, through veteran accounts, partially declassified patrol logs, academic studies of unconventional warfare. The mountains where American paratroopers vanished, where Australian SAS patrols faltered, where Green Berets finally imposed dominance without ever owning the ground, became a quiet lesson. Firepower wins battles. Psychology wins wars. Captain Elias Harlan retired in 1981 after commanding at group level. He never published memoirs. Sergeant Kisor Dak returned to his village in Darlak in 1970, resumed life among his people, and, like his Australian counterpart in the original accounts, refused all requests to discuss what he had done in the Longhai. When pressed by an American researcher in the 1990s, he said only, "That war belongs to the mountains. Let it stay there." The Longhai Mountains remain. The caves are silent now. But for a few years, they belonged to men who learned to hunt ghosts and became them.